the writing community chat show, Advent Christmas Calendar.
Well, I think one of the most interesting things about a crime writer or a horror writer or anything kind of more in line with the real world is their search history and how you explain that if it was ever scrutinized. Because I can guarantee someone who wrote about murder has Googled how to kill somebody.
Yeah, and the thing is that when you search like in Google, yeah, like I remember one time I was searching like poisonous, like I don't know, like ways to kill someone, and like I type it on Google, and Google said like, "Is everything all right?" or "Call this number," and I'm like, "No, it's for a book." Like,
yeah, do you need support? Call this number now.
Yeah, exactly like that.
Well, actually, here I have a question for the other writers. What's the one thing in your search history that you just sort of like, if my friends and family saw this, they would have me committed?
See, my parents are both doctors, and they're used to me calling them up and saying, I need to stab a guy, and he needs to say 3 lines of dialogue before he dies. Where is he being stabbed? So in my family, this is kind of normal.
I love that you've gone into that thought process as well.
Oh, it's great. No, because they will tell me. Like, my dad's one of my alpha readers, and he's like, "Sweetie, that's not what happens in a car crash." And I'm like, "Well, then tell me."
Brilliant.
Yeah, because you're just right. Sometimes people get hung up on very minor facts. You know, I suppose we all want to get the main facts right. It's one thing that puts me off writing police procedurals, because I'm always scared about really messing up something, because there'll always be somebody that wants to point the finger and say, "Oh, there's only actually 3 doors in that police station that you mentioned," or "the toilet's actually on the left, it's not on the right." I've come across that a few times.
Go on, AD. What about you? You're very quiet over there. Have you got any interesting search history going on?
I don't know. I don't usually search on Google. I'll go to books.
Okay, I like it.
It's less incriminating if anything were to happen.
So what about in terms of actual physical research? How many of you have actually gone anywhere to kind of research an area?
One of the reasons that I set my book in the Upper Peninsula is because I live here. I mean, there's a few other reasons, being that like people don't really know what it's like here. It's a place where you can actually isolate somebody in the 21st century away from internet and away from phones. And that's been a real learning experience for people who've been reading it. But because I live here, that's why I set it here, right? So it was kind of that way around.
My books seem to never take place anywhere I've been. I don't know how it happens. I know the one I'm working on now, I just said Sunset Valley Diner. And then I was like, where would that be? I Googled, and there's like a Sunset Valley, Texas. I'm like, I've never been to Texas, but that's where my book takes place.
Do you like Google Street View and you're like, okay, I'm walking down?
No, but I should. That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
Oh yeah, it's good, and I've got very weird, and like, I don't know if you use much of a notebook, but I really need a notebook whenever I'm writing, just for, well, remembering names for one thing, because I always forget the characters' names, and everybody changes their names so many times, and then you get very confused. But even I tend to draw out maps, or even the pictures of the rooms, so I can remember what's in it, or you know what way they'll go this way or that, because you can end up tripping yourself up.
Interestingly, Rebecca, I actually did Google Street View when on the second book that I wrote. Actually, this place in Quebec, I've never been there, but it was the same. The exact house I used, the street, and everything was all from Google Maps. It was weird that I did that, but the inspiration must have come from somewhere.
I think it's useful. I've read a book that was set in the city I grew up in, and she got something wrong. I'm just like, there is not a mailboxes, etc. right there. Like, there's not, right? So since then, I either pick someplace I know, or I'm pretty vague, right? Just a Michigan town, you know. Everybody still says Ope and all the Midwesternisms, so it has to be Michigan. But yeah.
Okay, it's a great question from Darren. Thank you, Darren, and thank you for tuning in. It says, when considering true crime, how important is it to the guests that the crime is solved? Which is a really good question. Are there any unsolved crimes that intrigue and have inspired the panel?
I really like listening to Unsolved crime podcasts. And I know there's a few Netflix documentaries. I think there's an Unsolved show, but it's also very frustrating, but it's helpful too, because how did they miss something not to be able to solve this murder or whatever happened? And you can kind of pick that apart to put into your writing on, you know, if your villain's going to get away with it, it helps.
Definitely.
I guess the unsolved ones that really kind of stuck out to me were like, I guess some of the more famous ones. I mean, everything from the DB Cooper plane hijacking is infinitely fascinating to me. I was really, for a while, I was very much into the Black Dahlia murder and all the different conspiracy theories that came out of that. I mean, for the unsolved ones, it was a lot of, I guess, the more well-known unsolved crimes that really kind of got me. When Darren asked that question, the second part was an unsolved crime that inspired me. Considering the topic of my book, no, not really the unsolved crime, because from the outset, the crime is laid out, like, you know what happens. But this comes back to like the weird search detail. I read a true crime book about the Irish mob in New York in the 1970s and the 80s. And there's a scene in there where they very graphically describe someone being decapitated post-mortem. And as it's happening, one guy turns to the other and goes, "Hey, feel how heavy this head is." And I was just like, oh, I wonder how much the human head weighs. So I Googled that and spent a fair amount of time going through like, oh, and apparently the average weight is 9 to 13 pounds. So there, you've all learned something from me today if you didn't know.